Hey guys, UnoPro here, back for part 2 of my patch analysis for 1.96. In the first video we covered the liner and the Songhai cards, and then I had to have a basketball game, so I had to cut it a bit short. So now we're back in between, we've got another basketball game, so we've got to go a little bit quick, but we're going to get it all done, hopefully. So our first one is a Cumulonimbus, however you say that card, I will never know. So it was a 4 mana, Intensify, summon 2 windows using nearby your general. Now it's 5 mana. I'd say this is a pretty massive nerf. I'm not really expecting this card to see too much play now. It was kind of before pretty much just an auto-include in most Vetruvians. Maybe not auto-include in the more controlling variants, but it was very, very good. Now it's definitely not going to see any non-heavy Dervish decks, I don't think. But it may still see play in some Dervishes. Like, it's probably only a good card with Fireblaze Obelisk now. It's like 5 mana deal 4 is pretty bad on the first one. The second one can be 5 mana deal 8, which is not bad, but it's very situational. The 8 can't be distributed that well. Maybe it sees some home in aggro, since I'm really not expecting much of this card. I think this does hurt aggro vet a lot. I think maybe the Dervish decks might want it. But without Fireblaze Obelisk, I don't really see this card being any good. So I wouldn't really expect to see this in any non-Fireblaze Obelisk builds, and even then I might not even include it. So yeah, not too high on this card for sure. Alright, so our next one is Dusk Weaver. It went from a 1/1, so it's a 2 mana 2/1, Dying Wish, put a random Scion's Wish spell in your action bar. And it's gone from a 1/1 to a 2/1. Now, I think this is a pretty decent buff, though I'm not really sure it's good enough. 1 health is really, really weak, and on a 2-drop, that's actually quite a big issue. If you're going first, you play a 2-drop, you're really relying on that to live a lot of the time. It allows you to go into 4 mana, or it allows you to play a 3-drop and a 2-drop. And if you have your Duskweaver simply die to just a Blood Tear or a Crater, or really a lot of different things, then you've actually missed out on 2 mana tiles a lot of the time. And I'm not sure that's something we really want to risk. The Scion's Wishes are generally pretty good, and often cards you will include into your deck anyway. But this is just not really something I want to be seeing on turn 1. And later on in the game, it's like a 2/1. When you want to be playing like 4-drops, it's like, when do you really want this? It's okay, maybe in like some but the thing is, even in a controlling variant, right, you don't really want the first wishes, or the second wish, or the third wish. They all want a minion to live. So the problem is, this is kind of like a controlling card where you're not really playing for tempo, you're just playing to draw some cards. You know, maybe you're playing an Arcanist thing, you're trying to get some spells, but this doesn't lend itself to decks that want to be on the board and make use of these Scion's Wishes. So I think there's a little bit of anti-synergy in what decks that will be trying to do. I think decks that want to draw spells from their minions often don't want to have minions on the board, or they won't have minions on the board. That's a pretty logical conclusion. So it doesn't really make sense with the Scion's Wish. Maybe it sees play in some decks that can't really afford to play a lot of card game early. They want to cycle on early. Maybe it's okay. I mean, it could be gas in like an aggro deck. It is a Dervish, which is relevant. It does kind of give you, maybe in like an aggro Dervish deck, it's okay, because it actually does a lot for 1 card. When you're if you're being aggressive, you have the minions on board. Similar to like a Lantern Fox type effect, but I'm not really seeing it too much. Could be wrong though. This could see some play. Alright, next one is Equality Constraint. So this was changed from 2 to 1, so any minion's health becomes equal to its attack. I think the 1 mana, making it 1 mana does help. It's very similar to something like Polarity, which is seen playing in Arcanist decks, though that is 0 mana, I believe. This you don't actually lose the stats. It could definitely see place in like an Owl Beast kind of deck, making health, where you're buffing your health. You typically have high health with a lot of your minions anyway, so I could definitely see something like that being the case. Aside from that, I don't think we'll see too much use. I mean, Portal Guardian did just get a buff, right? Portal Guardian, this is very good with Portal Guardian. Portal Guardian has become a 0/8 again. Portal Guardian used to be a very, very powerful card. Maybe this honestly could see some play. With Portal Guardian, you need other stuff in the deck. I mean, it's not unreasonable that you would run stuff like Azul Shamans in a low to the ground minion build that would be running Portal Guardians. Azul Shaman is obviously very good with this card. You have more 1/4s. It doesn't work with the Obelisk, unfortunately, which is a little bit, a little bit of a downside. Obviously, it'd be very good with them if they could actually attack. What else is there? There's not really too much really that takes part from that, but Azul Shaman, Portal Guardian kind of stuff, and there are a decent amount of high health minions. Maybe you can run that kind of thing if you run Bone Reapers potentially if you want to build around this card. It's an interesting card. I don't think it's great by itself. I think it kind of wants to be in a deck that I mean, it's pretty unlikely that it's naturally going to fit into a deck super well, but I think you could build around it potentially because it can be very, very powerful. We've seen how good Divine Bond was, and that was good even at 3 mana. This is 2 mana less, but you don't get the base attack, which is still, it still actually could be pretty good. It's actually quite easy to play 2 of these. Maybe this deck has potential, though I do think it is kind of a build-around card, at least to an extent. But Portal Guardian does help it a lot. Alright, so next one is Felchius, or Felchius, I don't know how you say it. I'm pretty sure it's Felchius. So this card was absolutely ridiculous at 3 mana. It's now a 4 mana, 3/3 opening gambit. Your general gains 2 attack this turn and takes no damage. Now I versed it a couple times already today. I got the chance to play a couple games at lunch, and I actually saw quite a few top S rank players playing it. Though I do expect it to drop off a little bit. It's not great against the Wanderer decks because you're basically playing 4 mana, and I mean decks that are kind of playing honestly on curve are not going to be playing 4 drops that die to Felchius. And if this card picks up, it's going to be played around as well, which is something that's pretty relevant. Before, they could play around it, but it's hard to play around. And when it's 3 mana, it's very, very different. Playing this and going face isn't always going to be that great. Maybe it saves a little place in aggro, or, I mean, obviously Sarge might want this card, but I think as a standalone, it's a lot worse now. And we do see this, the lower on the mana curve something is, when the cost goes up by 1 mana, it gets a lot worse. And, that's pretty obvious. It's going from, I'm not going to do like 100, it's like a 33% increase, I guess you would say. Whereas if, it's 8 mana to 9 mana, that's actually not that relevant a lot of the time. So, Felchius, I think it might see some play, though I think it's going to be nowhere near the power level it used to be when it was a 3/3 for 3. And might just be decks that have synergy with it rather than just playing as a good card. Alright, the next card is Lost in the Desert. Now, Lost in the Desert is a 4 mana spell that deals 5 damage to enemies not near another enemy. This used to do 6 damage, so now it does 5. I think this is actually a pretty significant nerf. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I mean, this card saw some play, and it's definitely a potentially powerful card, but it wasn't really in the top decks. And, it would show up occasionally and something you'd play around. And, you had to do a lot to make it work and kind of hope. It's very situational. And now if you're just taking even a bit of the power level away, that could be enough to just make it not see play. There's already a lot of effort to get it to work, and now it's just even a little bit less weak. It's not like 5 and 6 is a massive difference, but it's just like the power level is kind of already just on the brink of being worth all the effort it takes. Now the other reason is that a lot of these decks would try and do something like Thunderhorn, give it Blast or give it Flying, and then naturally the way to play around Thunderhorn is separate your minions, where you simply just Lost in the Desert. Now Thunderhorn's a 4/4, that's weaker, your Thunderhorns are weaker, your Lost in the Desert's are weaker, and this was not a particularly top tier deck anyway. So I think those combination of factors we probably won't see too much of this card, though we will see. Like, this can always catch you off guard. People might run it as like a 1 or a 2 of just to see if they can really get people. And maybe they run some. I mean, Portal Guardian does help this card as well, so that's something to consider. I think Portal Guardian is going to be a very, very powerful card. It was one of the defining factors of Vet at a 0/9. 0/6 was a massive nerf, and I think going back to 0/8 is very, very similar. 8 and 9. Can't really complain about that. So I think Portal Guardian could be a big way to build around Vet, and with the equality constraint, maybe that is something that happens. I mean, it does sound a little bit, a little bit optimistic, as Portal Guardian Living is normally pretty good, but Portal Guardian can be played around. But if you can just hit him for 8 with the equality constraint, maybe that's something an aggressive Vet actually wants to be doing. Alright, so the next one is Notion of the Starless Eternity. And that is the trial for Vetruvian, where it was a 5 mana 3/3, I believe. Yep, and now it's a 6 mana 3/3. When your general reaches the other side of the battlefield with an artifact equipped, you have access to playing this card, and then you gain the destiny of each equipped artifact. Gives your general a tier of ascension, so it goes frenzy into flying into celerity. Obviously very, very powerful once you get it. I don't think this is a massive nerf to the deck. I think the deck will still be viable. I think you often reach the other side of the board at around 6 mana anyway. And a Sarge deck is often not going to be doing much with, if like let's say they're at 6 mana and they had it at 5 mana, it's not going to be doing that much. With that extra 1 mana, often your Bloodborne spell is not going to be good. Then you don't run 1-drops normally, maybe a Blood Tier. So I don't think it's the biggest deal. Though obviously a nerf, getting there early could actually, you still have to wait a turn to play this. So slowing it down by a turn, I think the deck still will function very, very similarly. I don't think this changes too much, honestly. But just a nice little nerf to the deck, as some of the other decks are losing some tools, and maybe they've tested it out and seen that this is quite strong. I think this is more one of these nerfs where they're kind of preparing for a meta based on what the changes they know, and they've tested out these changes, so we can kind of assume that maybe the trial deck would have been quite good at 5 mana. I can still see it getting a lot of play at 6 mana though. I think this doesn't hurt the deck too much. Alright, next one is Osirix. Okay, so this one, I personally classify it as a buff. The game did actually classify it as a nerf because it did lose some stats, but it also went down in mana cost. So it went from a 7 mana 8/6 with flying, Dying Wish equipped 2 random artifacts to your deck, and it got reduced to 6 mana and a 6/5. I think this is actually probably good for the deck. 6 mana is a lot easier to achieve than 7 mana, especially when you're going second, because you can often actually, the turn you could ramp into 5 mana, you can kind of set up to ramp up into 6. It's a very common thing with the Wanderer decks, though very, very rarely do you actually ramp into 7 mana. So I think Osirix being 6 mana is actually pretty huge. Whether or not this means this card still play, it's still very weak to any hard removal that doesn't activate the Dying Wish, which I guess there's actually a fair bit of. Like, we have Blood of Air was seeing a lot of play. We had Bear Seals from your Songhais. You have Egg Morphs, but I think this could be quite a fine deck in the trial deck potentially, if you're looking to go a little bit more value. Though there are probably better options that equip instantly. So I guess it's probably actually more of a mid-range kind of card. It could be a finisher. It's not a terrible card. 6/5 for flying for 6 is bad, but not terrible. If you get the Dying Wish off, it's actually really good. But I think a lot of the time the counterplay to this would be something simple as, just leaving it, take the 6, and if you don't play a 5 attack minion, they can't trade off. So they've done 6 mana for 6 damage the turn after, and they haven't actually really progressed that much, which is not that amazing. But I think this card could see some players as kind of a finisher. It'll be interesting to see which finishers kind of line up against the meta. Vetruvian has a decent amount of high mana cost cards. They have like the Amara at 6. They have the Blast Legendary at 6. They have different options. And this is just kind of another tool in the toolkit for which finishers they want to tackle the meta in some more mid-rangey control Vetruvian's deck. So I think it's nice that they have the options. I think this could potentially see some play, though I imagine you want to have to at least care about artifacts, at least in some regard. Not necessarily a full artifact deck, but the artifacts probably should be relevant. Okay. The next one is Pantheron. Alright, so this is an interesting one. So it's a 6 mana 8/8 that costs 0 if you cast all 3 Signs Wish spells this game. And it was originally a 6/6, so it's got a +2/+2. I'm not really sure on this. I think a deck that really, it could be okay. It's just really hard to imagine. It's like, it's a fine card. If you play 3 spells, if you can find a deck that actually wants to play them, it's pretty decent. But it's hard to be playing these and have enough minions and draw your wishes that you actually can cast your wishes on your minions, because you're doing this really weird balance between finding these spells, finding minions to play that live, and then also having these. I think that's a lot to ask. I don't really think that the 6/6 to the 8/8 makes too big of a difference. Maybe I could be wrong. An 8/8 body is a hell of a lot more threatening than a 6/6. Normally, most people will be equipped to deal with a 6/6 whenever it really comes down. An 8/8 is actually asking quite a lot, and it's not something a general can really normally afford to attack into. maybe to see some plays, but it really needs to find a shell in a deck that can have enough card draw and also be able to support the minions to be able to effectively cast the 3 wishes. Yeah, it's not the best finisher. I think there's normally more dynamic things you can be doing. So probably not going to see much play, but it's definitely a fair bit better as an 8/8. Alright, so the next one is Sandswirl Reader. 5 mana, 3/3, open gambit, return a nearby minion to its action bar, turn that space into Exhuming Sand, and it was originally a 3/4. Now this is was one of the most powerful cards in the game, and definitely made Vetruvian, at least the top 3 faction in my opinion. I think actually probably put it number 3. That's a bit controversial though. But this was one of the reasons to be playing Vetruvian. Playing Sandswirl Reader, it was just like anytime you just play something that doesn't immediately attack the board that costs like 3 or more mana, this card was just so good. You bounce it back to their hand, you develop a 3/4, which we can, let's say it's like 3 mana, 3/4, and then it's plus a Hailstone. Yeah, Hailstone Prison, the card that bounces back to your hand for 2 mana. So stat wise it made sense, but it does that both in one card. It gives you the Exhuming Sand. It's a lot of pressure. It was really good card, and one of the reasons for me playing Vetruvian. It's still going to be good, I think, as a 3/3, but it is a definite nerf. I don't think this will really change the deck's, the card's viability. I think it's still going to be a pretty likely include, unless the meta is pretty hostile to it, not a lot of big minions. Obviously, in a Wanderer meta, it's actually really good. But, as a 3/3, it still does hurt the power level. Dice to stuff like Blood Tip plus the general hit, and just more stuff in general. There's a decent amount of 3/4s around, stuff like that. So obviously it's weaker in that regard. I don't think this is going to really make you cut the card, but I think it just hurts the power level of the decks that want to play it, which you can argue whether or not that is justified. Alright, next one is Whisper of the Sands. So summon a Wind Dervish near each friendly obelisk for 2 mana. It used to draw a card, now it no longer draws a card. I think this is a fair nerf. I think it could have been quite powerful. We have more. Was this a Denizen's card? I believe it was. Yes, it was a Denizen's card, which makes sense. There's a lot more obelisks in the format now. We even got another 2 mana one by nerfing, not nerfing, changing the Windstorm obelisk to a 2 mana card. So it makes sense that with that many 2 mana obelisks running around, this card could just go crazy. It still could be quite good. You really don't have to get 2 off it to be good, and there's possibly decks that can consistently do that. But with the draw card attached, it would just be kind of crazy. Like, I mean, if you can get this to be similar to Rashar's draw card, that's already pretty insane. So I can definitely see why they did this. I think it's a fair nerf. And definitely does hint that there could be some obelisk power in the deck. It's kind of a weird way to think about patches, but sometimes the nerfs can kind of tell you where there is actually some power level that we might gloss over a little bit. Alright, and our last one, which we just kind of talked about a little bit then, is our Windstorm. Spelled that wrong. Windstorm Obelisk, which was our 3 mana obelisk, 0/6, summon Dervish. Your Dervish is at +1 health, and it's been changed to a 2 mana 0/4. Not really sure on this. We have the standard obelisk, which is a 0/6 that doesn't give health. So it's less of an obelisk card and more of a dervish card now. It could be very good in a dervish deck, like something like Zivix. Turning your 2/2s into 2/3s is pretty massive. So this is a deck that really cares about dervishes rather than just trying to get that obelisk value, which is something we don't always see. Like, we often just see like a little bit of dervish support, but you're running the obelisk because they're pretty good cards by themselves. Now I think this is something you want to be running in that. But there's a couple of 2 mana options for obelisks now. It is possible that you just run all 3, because if you wanted in the past to build a deck where you're relying on having a turn 2 obelisk, you might only have 3 or maybe 6, depending on how recently you played, options for that in the deck. And now suddenly you have access to 9 of them if you want to play 3 of each on turn 2. And that adds a lot of consistency to the deck. You can start playing Tunecasters and other cards on this assumption that you're very likely to actually have a dervish going into your second turn. So that is actually something to keep an eye out. I think obelisk does have a decent amount of support at the moment. So maybe get your Lightbenders ready, I guess. Alright, that is Vetruvian. I think that was one of the bigger changes. Sandswirl and Akuma Nimbus is probably the massive change. That's going to hurt Vetruvian a lot, but I think there's still a lot of potential. I think Vetruvian could still be quite a good faction. Just has to kind of go a little bit away from that tempo aggro plan. Alright, so our first Abyssian card is called Aphotic Drain. It was a 2 mana, destroy a friendly minion to restore 1 health to your general, 5 health to your general. Now it's 1 mana, very similar to Dark Pact in Hearthstone, which we saw was good. Obviously a little bit less health. Obviously we're not comparing it to that. We're comparing it to how it works in Duelyst. I think making this 1 mana is definitely a very positive thing. We have some Deathwish decks running around. Either way, I think this could play as a sideboard card in those Dying Wish decks, that's for sure, against Burn. Whether or not it's going to ladder is a whole other thing. I mean, honestly, a lot of the Abyssian dying, there's some that just want to die. Most of them, like, you kind of get value from both sides of the body, like the bigger stuff, like the Reaper of the 9 Moons, and what's the Celerity guy, the 6/6 with Celerity. Like, you kind of get both sides. You have some other stuff, but they're often like 2 health. And it's like, do you really need to kill it immediately? So I'm not really sure. I think there's probably better ways to kill your minions. Like, you have the new Abyssian General's Bloodborne spell. Darkfire Sacrifice is going to be almost better than this. So I don't think this will see play in main decks. I could be wrong. Maybe it's like a 1-up or something. Unless you really have a ridiculous amount of ways to kill your own minions. To benefit off killing your own minions, I'm probably not seeing too much play. Though I'm not an Abyssian expert, I could be wrong on that for sure. So the next card change, which was a little bit surprising to me, is Desolator. So it's a 4 mana, 2/1, opening gambit, steal 2 health from your general, and from the enemy general, and Dying Wish returns it to your action bar. It was a 3/1. Not really sure why they nerfed this card. I wasn't super high on it. Obviously, you can win a really, really long game, but your opponent has to spend 4 mana playing a 3/1 a lot of times. So if that health isn't mattering immediately, I don't really see this being good. I'm not really sure what kind of decks it's meant to be even good against. Like, Wanderer decks, they'll still just, play a Wanderer when you play this, or play a big threat, and you blood tier it. And yeah, sure, you stole 2 health, but I've just developed a way bigger board. Aggro is just going to ignore it. They're going to go under it. I'm not really sure why this card was nerfed. Maybe in their testing they found it was really good. Maybe it was terrorizing the lower ranks so people don't have access to the ways to kill their opponent fast. I'm not sure. From a competitive point of view, I don't think this card was deserving of a nerf. I could be, I could be missing some cards from Shimza or some other new combos that we have, but I don't know, on face value, I'm not really seeing it. Alright, so the next one is Horrific Visage. So, Horrific Visage is a 3 mana spell that gives all enemy minions -4 attack until your next turn. That now gives -4 instead of -3. Not really sure that is overly relevant. I guess it's kind of good if you're trying to trade in with a board, but don't really think this is going to, like, decks that would have wanted this, which I don't know what would have, still want it. I don't think it's going to really change what decks do want it. It's a very, very situational card. You need to have a board ready to trade in with your opponent, which is actually not something that happens that much. And you need them to not be high attack minions. I'm not really seeing this card. I mean, it's good with the frenzy. It's kind of a bit of a stretch. I think it's all a bit of Christmas Land stuff. I think I'd much rather 3 mana be playing something that always does something that can pressure my opponent or remove their creatures rather than just temporarily diluting them. Unless you have some deck that really just wants to get late game and can stall. But then you also need to have board clears. There's no point just having these kind of blank turns, stop your general from taking damage if you're not actually building into something very powerful and clearing the board later on. If they just keep developing their board into it, then where have you gotten? So, not expecting a lot of play from that one. But, I mean, I guess it was a bad card. It got buffed. It's never really a bad thing. So, our next card is Night Fiend. Alright, Night Fiend. So, Night Fiend is a 5 mana, now 5 mana 4/4, opening gamut. Deal 2 damage to each enemy on or near friendly Shadow Creep. So, it was a 3/3, now it's a 4/4. Decently relevant, the extra stat, though I think the main thing that's going to be holding this card back in general is how well it actually, how well the opening gambit is. Obviously, it's always nice to have these like slight 1/1 buffs. Whether or not that actually changes anything, though, is a whole different thing. And I think, like, this card is either going to be good and you're going to kill everything near a Shadow Creep, or it's going to be or it's not going to, and it's going to be bad. I don't think being a 4/4 particularly changes that. It does make it slightly better when it's kind of a bit average, but yeah, I don't think this changes too much. Though a nice little buff to Shadow Creep, and obviously this card, if it does see play, is quite good for Shadow Creep because it gives your opponent a really tough decision. Do they stand on the Shadow Creep? Oh, actually, no, it's on or near. So I guess the playing around it is pretty similar either way. I'm not really expecting this to see too much play, but I didn't before. We don't really see much Shadow Creep decks in general, so it's kind of hard to see. Like with these, a lot of the archetypes are just not explored very much at all. If they're not that good, then there's like no one in S rank playing them, and we don't really know what the good cards in the deck are. So maybe Shadow Creep wanted to fit this in, but I don't think Shadow Creep in general is good enough to be even concerned about this card in constructed play for the time being. But it does get better. I mean, it's 4/4 is a decent amount better than a 3/3, but I think going to 5 is much better. 3 to 4 is probably one of the more insignificant health increases. Obviously, it gets a little bit worse as you go on, but 4 to 5 is quite a big one, I would say. Really going from an odd to an even to an odd is normally going to be pretty good because of the way general attacks work. Alright, so next one is Skull Prophet. So, this is now a 3 mana, 2/4 with Sentinel general attacks. The enemy general has -1 attack. And before, oops, just my mic, it's become a 2/4. I mean, I guess this is nice. It is quite good to have like the health buff on the general attacks one if it gets attacked into. It's like if your opponent was counting on blood tearing it or something, then suddenly it lives. So having a health buff on a general attack sentinel is pretty good. Still not sure how good this one is. The general attack ones can kind of be played around, and it's one of those things where you kind of almost want the other. You really need the other sentinels to be good for one of the sentinels to be good, because otherwise it's quite easy to play around this. If you know their opponent has this, it's really not that hard. You just find another way to deal with a 3/3, and then you go on about your business. So don't really think this will see too much play unless the Abyssian, other Abyssian ones prove to be viable. Alright, next one is Sphere of Darkness. Now, Sphere of Darkness, is this a Shimzai card as well? Yes, it must be. Alright, so it's quite good for the Shadow Creep decks that it has this card back, but it is now 1 mana. Now 2 mana instead of 1 mana. So it was 1 mana, turn an enemy space into Shadow Creep, draw a card. Now it's 2 mana. I think this is still, I guess, fine in a Cassiva deck if you're trying to play Shadow Creep game, though it definitely hurts to be 2 mana. Like, Cassiva was always kind of just, it's like an extra Bloodborne spell when you need it. It combines with 1. Now, if you're combining it with a Bloodborne spell, that's 3 mana. I think this really does hurt. Like, you've literally doubled the cost of the card, so it makes sense. I think maybe still see some play in the Shadow Creep decks, but I'm more worried that the Shadow Creep decks just aren't going to get there at the moment. Oh, and now no longer deals to the general as well, which is relevant for sure. Only the minions now. I'm not sure they needed to do both. I think that was a bit excessive. Alright, so the Releaser is our last one. So it was a 3 mana artifact. When this artifact breaks, summon a random friendly non-token minion destroyed this game nearby. And now it's 2 mana. So, like, best case scenario, it's like a 2 mana artifact that spawns a random nearby minion. Let's say we can even somehow do it immediately. I think this card's pretty bad. You're relying on your opponents to play big minions. No, it's a randomly friendly minion. So you play your own big minions, but often your big minions, especially in Abyssian, take a turn to do something, unless it's like a Spectral Revenant. You can't play any of the good early Abyssian draws to ramp in with Darkfire Sacrifice, or you can get this, and your opponent can just ignore it if the game's stalled, or they just kill it. I really don't think these artifacts that do nothing, even if they're just 2 mana, if they do nothing by themselves, then it's not really going to be that good. I mean, technically this one does something by itself, but it doesn't have any attack, which is a pretty big hindrance to an artifact. Alright, that is Abyssian done. Next on is to Magmar. So our first card in Magmar is Dreadnought. So Dreadnought became a 4/7, which was a 4/6. So it's 6 mana, 4/7 now. With Rebirth, eggs you summon gain +2/+2. Not really seeing this card. I don't think the 4/6 was the big issue. I don't think the common play pattern that turned you off this card was, play my Dreadnought, he dealt 6 damage to it. It's often going to be, he bear sealed it, I spent my whole turn doing nothing, he only spent 3 mana to deal with it. That's a bad play pattern. I'd much rather play my Mercantor. Don't think the 7 health matters that much, but there is more egg support these days, Was this a Denizens card as well? Yes, it was. So obviously that's one of the reasons that you would want to play this card compared to before. It was not very good. You have Ragnar as a hero now, which obviously this works well. There's the eggs force field, so I guess in an egg deck it could be quite decent. Giving +2/2 to the eggs you summon is a little weird. Like, it helps them survive, but I don't know, there's like a certain point where you kind of expect your eggs to, like, your opponent can just let the eggs survive and kind of treat the fact that you've just played a 4/7 for 6 that doesn't really impact the board that much. I'm not really sure. Maybe there is an egg deck, and if there is an egg deck, you might want this. Even then, I'm not 100% sure. I'd still often play Mercantor over it, since it just gives the eggs the 2/2. So it doesn't really affect the board in any sizable way. Alright, next one is Flaming Stampede. So, Flaming Stampede used to deal 5 damage to everything, and now it deals 8 damage to everything. I'm not really convinced on this one. I mean, now it actually has some play as a finisher. Dealing 8 damage for 8 mana actually can be a viable finisher. Like, Spiral Technique is a card that has seen some play, and it is also a board clear. It's kind of risky though, compared to the other finisher where you turn your general to a 10/10. You actually could be getting some health gain. You're going to end up at 10. A lot of the time where you do this, you are going to be less than 10, so you're much more likely to die on the way back. Though saying that, this is also good when you're not in a finisher mode, and it quickly turns you into finisher mode. I do still think it's probably not going to be very good, especially if it sees play. And I think a lot of these kind of weird situational cards, that's how it is. If they see play, they become bad. If they don't see play, maybe they could be okay. Because if I know my opponent's playing this, let's say I'm playing like a decently dynamic deck. Like, I mean, Songhai is probably a bit of a cheating answer, but there's lots of stuff like Vetruvian can have burst, whatever burst. Most decks will have some burst, and I just know, okay, I can set up any board state I want. And if my opponent's relying on this card to clear my board, well, I just need to make sure I can kill him after he deals 8 damage to himself. And that's a big downside to this card. If you're hoping to be behind on board and then just reset the board, but also deal 8 damage to yourself, not really sure. Maybe in an egg deck, I could see this as a one-off. Like, when this is a one-sided board clear, this could actually be quite good. Like, you play this, run away, you have a board, they don't have a board, and suddenly those eggs are going to hatch and kill them. Maybe it's... I'm not really seeing this in any non-egg deck, that's for sure. Probably won't even be good in the egg decks. That's a lot of mana. 8 mana is an absolute ton in Duelyst. Alright, the next one is Morin Kerr, which is our artifact. Got changed from 5 to 6. I think this is another Denizens card. Yeah, so you can kind of see a lot of the nerfs are actually Denizens cards coming back in, which makes sense. There's not that many cards that are really oppressive in the current standard, but there's cards that can come back in and really change anything. So your general was 5 mana, now it's 6 mana. Your general gains +3 attack, and whenever your general deals damage, hatch all friendly eggs. Obviously, now that Ragnar exists, this makes it a lot better. For 6 mana, you could actually attack for 5 with your general and get a 3/1 egg and have this, and then it gets better if you have any other eggs. Or you attack in with your 3/1 that actually popped already, your egg, and then you turn it back into an egg, attack in again. That's actually a pretty decent finisher as well. So I think this card could still see some play if there is an egg deck. I think in an egg deck it's a pretty decent amount of burst sometimes, but it's pretty situational. Again, where are you playing this deck? How many 6-drops do you want? There's a couple of good 6-drops already in Magmar. How often is this going to be better than Mercantor? I'm not too sure. Though Magmar of all factions can get away with running a bit more late game because they do have healing, they have board clears, and they have Flash Reincarnation to get their minions out for cheaper, so they have more expensive non-minion cards. Alright, next one is Omniseer. Oh, did I spell that wrong? Omniseer is not coming up for me. Oh, I have Denizens. Shut up. Okay, yeah. Alright, Omniseer. So, this card got can now be used on any nearby space. I'm not sure exactly what it was before. So it's 4 mana, 4/5, turning space into a Primal Flourish on any nearby space. I think it might have been one with a minion, which doesn't really change too much, I don't think. yeah, I'm not really seeing it. I guess it's a nice little bit of flexibility, and if there's a deck that wanted it before, maybe they want it now. Probably not that great though. Yeah, I mean it doesn't. It's pretty much the same level of power level. It's like a tiny bit better, but not much. Siltha Elder. Did I spell that wrong? I always forget it's Siltha Elder. Alright, so Siltha Elder, this is a bit of a blast from the past. This used to be a 7 mana 8/8. Then, for the last year, it's been a 7 mana 6/6 with Rebirth. At the end of your turn, summon a nearby Siltha Egg, Elder Egg nearby. Now it's a 7/7. So we've seen 6, 7, and 8 for this card. 7/7 is obviously better than 6, though I don't think that's really the big issue. I mean, I guess going to 4 is bad if you like flash it out. I think that's often something you need to consider. And now, maybe it's something you can actually flash out into the face of a Mecantor or Thunderhorn, which is quite relevant. I mean, it's definitely a fairly significant buff, but I mean, it's definitely a decent buff, but I wouldn't say it's that big actually. Yeah, normally this card is like, can you deal with it or not? It doesn't really matter too much if it's a 7/7 or a 6/6. Nice little buff. I mean, this is kind of one of the OGs of Duelyst, so it's nice to see getting a bit of love, but I don't think it's going to really change how it's played. Could be wrong though. And a 7/5 is a fair bit better than a 6/4 when you flash it out, so something to consider. Though while we can still be flashing out with Wanderers, it's probably better. Alright. Next one is Tremor. So, Tremor is now 1 mana instead of 2 mana. So it stuns enemy minions in a 2/2 area. And this is also another pretty decent buff. It's kind of like a Frigid Corona. Sometimes when you don't draw a card, if you just hit 1, which is fine because it's 1 mana less. If you hit 2, it's actually quite good. I guess the best comparison is Flash Freeze. If we say we don't care about the deal 1 damage, which we kind of do, it's not as good. It's a fair bit worse if you only hit 1 minion. If you hit 2 minions, it's quite good. If you hit 3 minions, it's really good. And obviously at 4, it's amazing. I think for the most part, well, I mean, actually, honestly, I can see this in Starhorn. I really could see this in Starhorn because anytime you see a 1 mana spell in Magmar, it's a lot better in Magmar, or I guess something like Songhive as well. But Magmar has Starhorn, and Starhorn just wants to be able to vomit cards without carrying out card advantage. They would sometimes run stuff like Repulsor Beast or something. So I think maybe this is good, like, because you don't care about the card advantage. Maybe it's fine. Don't expect to see too much play in non-Starhorn decks unless you really have a lot of ways to control cards, or you're playing a lot of board clears. If you're playing a decent amount of board clears, maybe this is fine. It just depends how much you can rely on your board clears. If you can rely on board clears consistently, this can get you 2-way board clear for a turn, and you even develop a threat that could live through your board clear. Maybe it's okay. Definitely not a bad card now that's at 1 mana. And again, it's going from 2 mana to 1 mana is pretty massive buff, so definitely something I could see working. The next card is Verdant Fulmination. So it was 4 mana, now it's 3 mana, and it's a spell that does your minions on friendly Primal Flourishes grow. Turn your other minion spaces into Primal Flourish. Not really seeing too much. I'm not expecting to see too much play. I don't think the Primal Flourishes will be overly consistent. I'm not sure what the cheapest way to give Primal Flourish is, but add that to 3. That's the earliest you can guarantee this does something the turn you come down to. Otherwise, you're kind of relying on a bit of setup.